The air in Beijing always tastes like metal and necessity. By 2018, my cover as Dr. Elaine Sharp, a specialist in Ming Dynasty porcelain and textiles, was worn smooth, like a pebble perpetually tumbled by the tide. For 3 years, I had operated out of a modest but strategically located gallery near the Forbidden City, a legitimate magnet for high-level collectors and, crucially, influential officials interested in cultural exchange, or maybe just money laundering. My true target, however, was invisible: Project Dragonfire Dash. This was not a missile system. It was far worse: a quantum-resistant key generation system designed to render all current Western encryption methods obsolete within months of deployment. If China successfully deployed Dragonfire, the entire digital infrastructure of NATO, the Five Eyes Alliance, and every major Western government would become an open book. The criticality of the intelligence was absolute, justifying the agonizing, minute-by-minute tension of my existence. I had finally secured a meeting with Pan, a logistics officer deep inside the Ministry of State Security's (MSS) Technical Bureau, who had managed to siphon off the core schematics, the quantum entanglement protocols themselves. The acquisition was scheduled for 0300 hours at the Ghost Street Night Market, a location chosen specifically for its sensory overload. The smell of chili and cumin thick enough to choke on, the cacophony loud enough to drown out a scream, and the sheer volume of faces that offered protective anonymity while simultaneously hosting 1,000 hidden eyes. The paradox of Beijing surveillance is that the density of observation points creates blind spots if you move fast and low enough. But movement was exactly what they were tracking. Every step I took, every conversation I held, every micro-purchase was aggregated, cataloged, and analyzed by an AI known internally to the MSS as the Panopticon. I knew I wasn't just being watched, I was being anticipated. My mission was not just to acquire the data, but to survive the anticipation. The exchange itself was a masterclass in controlled chaos. Ghost Street at 3 in the morning is a spectral place, headlights cutting through the cooking smoke like lasers. Han was jittery, his face slick with sweat despite the cool night air. He was wearing a cheap, synthetic jacket, highly unusual for his bureaucratic position, a necessary alteration for our meeting. We never spoke. We communicated purely through objects and position. I was haggling loudly over a ridiculously overpriced silk painting with an equally complicit vendor, our secondary extraction safety net. Han bumped me while feigning drunken clumsiness near a stack of dusty porcelain vases. The exchange took less than half a second. A sealed, credit card-sized flash drive, encased in thermally insulating plastic, passed from his oversized cuff into the false bottom of the antique lacquer box I was pretending to examine. I registered the weight, the slight friction, and continued my charade. The moment he disappeared into the crowded alley, I felt the tightening. Not physical, but environmental. The low-level hum of anxiety that always permeated the city suddenly spiked. As I walked the long, twisting route back to my safe house, the gallery's back storage room, I noticed 2 specific indicators. First, the repeated presence of a specific model of black Jetta, 3 blocks apart, with tinted windows that absorbed light unnaturally. Second, a sudden shift in the street cameras facing my route. The low-power indicator lights, usually flickering subtly, were all synchronized, staring directly down the center line of the street, adjusting their focus far too rapidly for standard patrol monitoring. Panopticon was shifting resources. They hadn't caught Pan yet, but they had registered the anomaly, the break in his routine. The lockdown was imminent. I had the crown jewels of Chinese cyber warfare, and I was holding them in the most surveilled city on Earth, minutes before the cage slammed shut. The initial plan had been elegant, almost poetic in its simplicity. The data would travel via a secure, encrypted burst transmission to a CIA contact masquerading as a cultural attaché in the Spanish embassy, who would then smuggle it out in the weekly diplomatic pouch. As I reached my gallery, manually disabling the electronic intrusion alarms before entering the secure annex, I checked the prearranged dead drop status. The signal, 3 slow pulses followed by a long pause, meant all clear. I received 4 rapid pulses, followed by immediate silence. Burned, the Spanish contact was compromised, likely under active surveillance, meaning the diplomatic pouch channel was now a liability, potentially booby-trapped by MSS counterintelligence. If I pushed the data through that channel, not only would Dragonfire be intercepted, but Washington would have a catastrophic intelligence failure, and my fate would be sealed in a subterranean cell beneath the Haitian district. I had raw, uncompressed schematics in my hand, and the digital pathways were lava. The panic I felt was cold and sharp, instantly translating into hyper-focused analysis. I had 30 minutes, maybe 45, before the net tightened so completely that even a stray cell phone ping would be traceable and incriminating. I had to find a method of exfiltration that was analog, visually ambiguous, and completely reliant on the laws of physics, not radio waves. I needed this silent code, a transmission method that did not look like a transmission at all. I had to turn critical state secrets into innocuous, beautiful antiquity. The trigger moment arrived violently, confirming my worst fears. I had just finished decanting a special chemical solvent when the local news ticker, which I monitored constantly for localized operational alerts, flashed a non-standard government notice. Ostensibly, it was an alert regarding unscheduled infrastructural maintenance around the Second Ring Road, requiring temporary, severe traffic restrictions and heightened security checks for all vehicles entering or leaving the downtown core. In agency parlance, this translated immediately to a Level 4 security lockdown, soft grid closure. But the real confirmation came via my secondary, highly secure comms line, which was a dedicated fiber optic cable masquerading as a telephone line for an entirely different business, a defunct textile importer next door. A single, encrypted phrase flashed: pawn taken. Containment protocol active. My source was captured, meaning the MSS now had a general vicinity of the intelligence breach and were initiating localized dragnet procedures. Every street camera, every vehicle recognition system, every facial recognition feed in the Central District was now operating on maximum alert, processing trillions of data points per second, hunting for anomalies related to Pawn's last known trajectory. I was a geological anomaly trapped beneath a seismic shift. I retrieved the flash drive, knowing I couldn't keep the digital artifact. I needed to miniaturize the data. The schematics were highly complex, but the core protocols could be reduced to approximately 10 megabytes of highly compressed, cryptographically secured information. I used a specialized, agency-issued microprinter, hidden inside a replica Song Dynasty incense burner, to transfer the data onto a tiny, highly resilient sheet of synthetic polymer, barely visible to the naked eye. This was the raw data package. Now, I needed the vector, the innocent carrier that would walk right past the armored checkpoints. The concept of the silent code crystallized around the physical nature of my cover: antiquities. The MSS valued culture and rarely suspected it. I needed something scheduled for legitimate export, something ordinary yet rare enough to justify special handling. My eyes settled on a specific piece, an export-approved item awaiting shipment to a major collector in London, a late Qing Dynasty calligraphy set, centered around a magnificent, finely aged badger hairbrush. The handle, carved from dark, densely grained padak wood, was the perfect substrate. The challenge was fusing the highly technical data with the organic irregularity of the wood grain without detection, even under visual scrutiny or standard airport X-ray. I utilized a chemical encryption technique developed for deep cover agents operating without access to electronics. The polymer sheet, holding the Dragonfire schematics, was dissolved in a custom-engineered UV-reactive lacquer, creating a micropigmented solution. I then applied this solution, the ink of a silent code, using an almost microscopic hypodermic needle to carefully trace specific, minute imperfections in the wood grain of the brush handle. The encryption key wasn't digital, it was spatial. The sequence of application, corresponding to the nodes and whorls of the padak wood, dictated the decryption order. This allowed me to visually mask the data as minor blemishes or the natural darkening of the wood's patina. To the naked eye, or even under low magnification, it simply appeared to be aged wood. Only a precise chemical reagent and UV light, applied in the correct sequence, would reveal the crystalline structure of the polymer containing the schematics. I was literally writing the future of cyber warfare onto the past. The application process was agonizingly slow and required absolute stillness, taking nearly 40 minutes. Every tremor in my hand risked fouling the microscopic application, corrupting the schematics beyond repair. As I worked, hunched over the workbench illuminated only by a low-intensity, red-filtered lamp, I could feel the invisible net tightening outside. I heard the distant, non-emergency siren wail, the sound of localized MSS patrols moving into predefined grid positions. I used my cover story to rationalize my isolation and intense focus. I had told my loan assistant, who had been cleared by the MSS as non-political and therefore safe, that I was performing a delicate, last-minute restoration treatment on a high-value piece before export, requiring maximum concentration and light discipline to achieve the desired matte finish. But I knew someone was watching closer. The Shadow Weaver, an MSS operative named Foam, who specialized in psychological pressure and extended deep cover surveillance, had been hovering around my gallery for 3 months, usually disguised as a doctoral student researching historical trade routes. Yesterday, Foam had tried to enter the secure annex under the pretense of verifying the provenance of a scroll. I had deflected him, maintaining my rigorous professional facade, but the move was calculated. He was testing the integrity of my perimeter. Now, with the lockdown active, Foam would likely escalate. I finished applying the final sealing coat, which was completely opaque under normal light, completely masking the UV reactive tracer. I placed the brush back into its presentation box, surrounded by protective silk, looking perfectly benign. If Foam entered now, he would see an exhausted curator finishing a high-stakes restoration, nothing more. I was preparing my exfiltration route, mentally mapping the checkpoints, when the gallery buzzer chimed, a specific, aggressive double tap. Foam. I glanced at the clock. 4:15. Too late for casual checks. Too early for a raid. This was a probing action, designed to exploit exhaustion and uncertainty. I straightened my tunic, wiped the microscopic residue from my workbench, and opened the door, maintaining the look of irritated professionalism. Foam, clad in a standard gray technician's windbreaker, held a municipal document authorizing a random safety inspection of all cultural relics scheduled for foreign export, citing the new infrastructure maintenance alert. His eyes were sharp, scanning the room not for fire hazards, but for inconsistencies. He moved like a predator testing a snare. He spent several deliberate minutes examining my porcelain collection, running his gloved fingers near the seams I used for concealment. Finally, he moved to the calligraphy set. I explained curtly, "This is the Qing-era Padok brush, Dr. Foam. Highly sensitive lacquer work. Please handle only the box." He picked up the box, turning it slowly. I watched his face, neutral, impassive. He was searching for any sign of disturbance, any new smell, any fresh tool mark. I held my breath. The schematics were inches from his hands. He opened the box, looked down at the perfectly innocent brush, then snapped the lid shut. "Very fine craftsmanship, Dr. Elaine," he murmured, his voice deceptively smooth. It would be a pity if anything were to delay its journey. He was not threatening the brush. He was confirming my adherence to the routine. The fact that he let it go meant he hadn't detected the chemical application, but it also meant he was satisfied that I was sufficiently contained. His departure left a vacuum of silence, but I knew the containment was tightening outside. I now had to get the brush across the city, through the escalating checkpoints, and onto an international flight. My intermediary was entirely unwitting, a necessary compromise when all agency channels fail. He was George Tinsley, a British correspondent for The Economist known for his abrasive critiques of the Beijing government, scheduled to fly out of Capital Airport, PK, on the 9 o'clock flight to London. He was attending a farewell reception for a retiring European cultural director at the National Museum, ending at 6 o'clock. This was my window. The transfer had to be instantaneous and deniable. I secured the calligraphy set inside a padded, nondescript messenger bag, arguing to myself that the highest-risk moments always demand the purest commitment to the cover. I drove my agency-issued, mid-range sedan towards the museum, a journey that usually took 30 minutes, now stretched into a harrowing hour due to the newly erected maintenance checkpoints. At each stop, armed police scrutinized my papers, running my license plate through the Panopticon database. My identity was clean, my destination verified, I had a legitimate invitation. But the delays were lethal. Every minute I was on the road increased the probability of a higher-level alert being disseminated, potentially flagging all museum attendees as persons of interest. I realized the MSS wasn't just tracking me, they were deploying a slow trap, letting me move, but ensuring the external pressure became insurmountable. As I approached the museum grounds, I saw the true extent of the lockdown. Plainclothes security details were visible among the departing guests, making subtle, overlapping patrols. I had to move with precision, knowing I was trading minutes for my life and the security of the West. The museum reception hall was a final, gilded trap. The air was thick with forced gaiety, champagne, and the nervous energy of guests attempting to ignore the visible increase in security personnel. I located Tinsley immediately. He was near the cloakroom, arguing loudly into his satellite phone about the oppressive heat in the hall. My mission required a flawless, engineered accident. I approached him, clutching my messenger bag. As I passed, I executed the pre-planned maneuver. I slightly shifted my weight, feigning a stumble over an unseen rug, throwing my arm out to steady myself against his back. As my hand briefly touched the shoulder strap of his worn leather satchel, I performed the transfer. The messenger bag was slightly damp. I transferred the calligraphy box from my bag into the open, external pocket of his satchel, which contained a stack of notebooks and a folded newspaper. The entire sequence took 1.2 seconds. The contact was minimal, the placement deep enough to be invisible unless he rifled through the pocket immediately. Tinsley barely registered the contact, merely grunting in annoyance, assuming I was another clumsy guest. I quickly offered a mumbled apology, smoothing down my jacket, and retreated immediately to the ladies' room. I did not wait to watch him leave. Watching would have risked exposure. Instead, I monitored the museum's external feed via a modified watch radio. The tension was suffocating. I saw Tinsley walk out, hailed a taxi, and sped towards PK. My job wasn't over until that flight lifted. The final chilling realization hit me moments later. A small, dark surveillance van, the same model of Jetta I had seen earlier, pulled up just as Tinsley's taxi rounded the corner. They had tracked me to the museum, but arrived seconds too late to interdict the asset. The timing was that precise. I was now exposed, but the payload was airborne. I allowed myself 30 seconds of cold triumph before the professional paranoia took over. The moment Tinsley checked in, the silent code, the Paddock brush, and the Dragonfire schematics was formally off Chinese soil and in the custody of an unwitting carrier heading towards a designated recovery team in London. But I was still in the belly of the beast. My safe house was now compromised due to Feng's visit and the proximity to the museum operation. I immediately enacted the burn protocol. I did not return to the gallery. Instead, I used a prepositioned emergency kit hidden beneath a sewage grate 50 feet from the museum grounds. I changed my appearance entirely, new clothes, dyed hair, different glasses, and melted into the flow of early morning commuters heading away from the central district. I spent the next 48 hours traversing the periphery of the city, using cash, avoiding all electronic interaction, and relying on pure instinct and operational tradecraft to stay ahead of the inevitable manhunt. The success of the silent code meant that the MSS would eventually realize the intelligence was gone, but they would be looking for encrypted radio signals, data packets, or compromised diplomatic couriers, not a tiny plastic polymer dissolved into the wood grain of an antique brush handle. The Dragonfire schematics reached London, were successfully decrypted, and sent the Western cyber defense community into immediate crisis mode. But critically, they gave us the months of lead time we needed. I finally exfiltrated 3 days later via a harrowing maritime extraction from Tianjin. But the feeling of constant, invisible eyes watching, of the algorithmic analysis hunting for the slightest deviation in my pattern, never truly left me. I had survived the lockdown, but the paranoia, the essential cost of living that double life, was now permanently woven into my memory, sharp as the point of that Paddock brush.